Snobby diners mocked me while I waited their table. They didn't know it was my restaurant. I decided to help wait tables at my Michelin star restaurant when we were short-staffed, figuring my talented sous chef could handle the kitchen for one night, even though at 62, I wasn't exactly quick on my feet anymore. When a table of 4 arrived, discussing how they'd flown in from their estate to experience the greatest culinary genius alive, I figured I'd take their table myself, just to see what devoted fans were really like. Then, the woman dripping in diamonds looked at me approaching with their water and said, "Good God, they're really lowering their standards. This decrepit old man belongs in a retirement home, not serving at the Temple of Gastronomy." Her husband, adjusting his Patek Philippe, added, "The chef would be mortified if he knew they hired someone who looks like he crawled out of a soup kitchen. This is a 3-star establishment, not charity work." I smiled and started pouring water, but my hands weren't as steady as they used to be after decades of knife work, and I spilled a few drops on the tablecloth. "This is unacceptable," the second woman shrieked, her Hermes bag trembling with rage. "This imbecile just defiled our table. Do you comprehend that we donated $50,000 to the chef's cookbook charity auction? He's an artist, and you're destroying his cathedral with your incompetence." She summoned another waiter immediately. "Remove this creature before he ruins everything the chef has built." When I tried to explain the specials, I forgot one ingredient in the amuse-bouche, and the younger man in the $10,000 suit interrupted me. "You don't even know the menu? This is sacrilege. The chef spent years perfecting these dishes, and you're butchering his poetry with your ignorance. Were you hired from a temp agency today?" He snapped his fingers in my face repeatedly. "The chef deserves servants who understand excellence, not whatever you are." The diamond-covered woman demanded to know my qualifications, then laughed when I stayed silent. "You've probably never eaten anywhere nicer than Applebee's. How could someone like you possibly serve the chef's masterpieces? You reek of poverty and failure." She waved her hand in front of her nose. "Is that mothballs? The chef maintains pristine standards, and you smell like a thrift store." When I brought their first course, my knee gave out slightly and I had to catch myself on their table. The older man stood up and shoved me backward violently. "Don't contaminate our experience with your working-class hands. You've probably never washed them properly in your life." He pulled out a handkerchief to wipe where I'd touched. "The chef would vomit if he saw vermin like you near his art. You're desecrating everything sacred about this place." I forgot which person ordered which wine, and the younger woman threw her napkin at my face. "How are you this incompetent? The chef is a god among men, and they hired someone with obvious dementia?" She turned to the others and said loudly, "He's clearly senile. Probably wandered in off the street." The chef would be horrified knowing someone this pathetic is representing his legacy. When I reached across to clear a plate, the diamond woman grabbed my wrist and dug her nails in until she drew blood. "Your disgusting sleeve touched my plate. That's biological warfare." She poured her $1,000 wine on me. "There. Now your exterior matches your worth. The chef creates perfection and you're the shit on his shoe. He'd probably pay us to eliminate you." The older man pulled out his phone and called someone. "James? Yes, I need you to buy this restaurant immediately so we can fire this subhuman. The chef deserves better." He turned to me and said, "My lawyer is drawing up the papers now. The chef will thank me when I cleanse his temple of parasites like you." Then he grabbed the hot candle from the table and poured the melting wax on my hands. "This is what the chef would do if he saw you touching his food." The younger man stood up and announced to the entire restaurant, "This senile fool is destroying the chef's reputation. Everyone should document this travesty." He grabbed my collar and yanked me down. "You're stealing from the chef every second you exist here. You're a stain on his brilliance. The chef is divinity incarnate, and you're not worthy to speak his name." Finally, the older woman pulled out a silver letter opener from her purse. "The chef is my reason for living, and I'm going to defend his honor." She slashed at my shirt, cutting it open. "There. Now everyone can see what worthlessness looks like." She spit in my face, her saliva hitting my eye. "You're the antithesis of everything the chef represents. He creates miracles, and you're an abortion that somehow survived. I hope you die before you can contaminate another of his dishes." That's when my manager walked over, beaming with no idea what had just transpired. She said, "I hope you're enjoying your meal being personally served by the chef himself. How does it feel to meet your hero?" All 4 of them sat frozen, their mouths hanging open, the older woman's hand still holding the letter opener, as the blood drained from their faces in perfect unison. The manager's smile vanished as she stepped between me and their table, her voice going cold. "You need to leave. Now." The letter opener slipped from the older woman's fingers and hit the floor with a sharp clang that made everyone nearby turn to look. The diamond woman's mouth kept moving, but no sound came out, her lips forming words that wouldn't come while her husband's face went from red to white to gray in about 3 seconds. I turned and walked straight to my office, my legs feeling like they might give out with each step, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the doorknob. Through the office window, I could see all 4 of them still standing at their table, not moving at all, just staring at the spot where I'd been standing, while other diners started pulling out their phones and whispering to each other. The manager came into my office about 5 minutes later and closed the door behind her, telling me she'd refused them service and called security to make sure they left the building. She said the older man had pulled out his wallet and started counting $100 bills right there at the table, trying to shove them into her hands. While saying something about making this all go away, but she'd told him to leave before she called the police herself. My hands were still shaking as I went into my office bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, seeing the wine stains all down my shirt and the long tear where the letter opener had sliced through the fabric. The wax burns on my hands were already turning red and starting to blister, and when I held them under cold water, it hurt so bad I had to bite my lip to keep from yelling. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of everything. The burns, the tear in my shirt, the dried blood on my wrist where the diamond woman's nails had dug in deep enough to break the skin. The blood had turned dark brown and crusty, and when I washed it off, the water in the sink turned pink as it swirled down the drain. The manager knocked and came in with a notepad, saying we needed to write down everything that happened while we could still remember all the details. We sat at my desk and went through it step by step, her writing while I talked, listing the names of the 3 servers who'd been close enough to see what happened. She pulled up the security footage on her computer, and we watched the whole thing from 2 different camera angles, seeing the wine being poured on me, the wax being poured on my hands, the letter opener cutting my shirt. The manager asked if we should call the police right now, or wait until after we closed for the night. And I said I needed 15 minutes to think about it, because my heart was still racing, and I didn't want to make any big decisions while I felt this shaky. She nodded and said she'd go check on the dining room, make sure everything was running smooth out there. About 10 minutes later, Gonzalo came up from the kitchen, and I could tell from his face that he'd already heard what happened. He looked at my torn shirt and the red marks on my hands, his jaw getting tight the way it does when he's really mad, but trying not to show it. "I've got the kitchen covered for the rest of the night," he said, and I knew he meant it because Gonzalo had been with me for 8 years and could run that kitchen in his sleep if he had to. Through my office window, I could see the 4 of them at the front entrance, the younger man waving his hands around like he was trying to explain something to the host, while the older woman kept pointing her finger and raising her voice loud enough that I could hear her even through the glass. The host looked scared, backing up a step every time the older woman moved closer, and I could see him looking around for help. The younger man seemed to be trying to pull the others away from the entrance, but the diamond woman was shaking her head and pointing at the dining room, probably demanding to be let back in. I went out to check on my staff, walking through the kitchen first, where everyone went quiet when they saw me, then out to the service area, where our servers were trying to act normal, but kept glancing at me with worried faces. The youngest server, a girl who'd only been with us for 3 months, came up to me with tears in her eyes and said she'd been so scared when she saw them attacking me, but didn't know what she should do. "That's not your job," I told her, putting my hand on her shoulder, even though it hurt to move my fingers. "You're not supposed to protect me from customers like that." She nodded, but still looked upset, and I could tell this had shaken up the whole team pretty bad. Gonzalo and I went back to the kitchen together, and I started plating dishes with him, focusing on each plate like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. My hands stopped shaking when I was working with the food, arranging each element exactly where it needed to be, making sure every plate that went out was perfect, even though my wrist hurt every time I moved it. The familiar rhythm of the kitchen, the sound of pans on the stove and orders being called out, helped calm my racing thoughts as we worked through the rest of the service together. When we finally closed the kitchen at 11:30, the manager came back and grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the office while saying I needed to call a lawyer right now, not tomorrow. She pushed me into my desk chair and stood there with her arms crossed until I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. Lydia Pearson had been coming to the restaurant for 6 years, always sitting at table 12, and ordering the tasting menu with wine pairings, and she'd given me her card once when another customer had tried to sue us over a shellfish allergy they never mentioned. I typed out a text explaining what happened, and within 2 minutes she replied that she'd meet me at 8 in the morning at her office downtown. The manager finally relaxed her shoulders and left to help the staff finish closing, but I stayed at my desk, staring at the security footage on my computer screen and watching myself get attacked over and over. Around midnight, I checked my phone and saw someone had tagged the restaurant in a video on social media, showing me spilling water on the tablecloth while the 4 customers yelled, but the clip cut off right before any of the violence started. The comments under it were already piling up, people saying we'd lost our standards and hired incompetent staff, that the customers had every right to be upset at such terrible service. I kept refreshing the page and watching the view count climb past 5,000, then 10,000, while more comments came in calling me pathetic and saying I deserved to be fired. My hands started shaking again, so I closed the app and tried to sleep on the couch in my office, but every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the hot wax burning my skin. At 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed with another notification. This time a longer video someone else had posted, showing the diamond woman pouring wine all over me and her husband grabbing my wrist hard enough to leave marks. This one had fewer views at first, maybe 300, but the comments were different. People getting angry about rich customers thinking they could assault workers just because they paid a lot for dinner. I watched both videos side by side, seeing how different the same incident looked depending on what parts people saw, and realized this was going to get complicated fast. By 7:30, I was driving to Lydia's office, my wrist throbbing every time I turned the steering wheel. And when I walked into her conference room, she took one look at my hands and told me we were going straight to urgent care to document everything. She pulled out her phone and started recording while I showed her the burns, the bruises, the torn shirt I'd brought in a plastic bag, making me turn my hands over and describe exactly what each person had done. At the medical center, the doctor cleaned the wax burns carefully, saying they were first degree and would heal fine in a week or two, though my hands might stay sensitive for a while. She examined my wrist next, pressing gently on the purple marks and asking me to move it in different directions, then wrapped it in a bandage and told me to rest it for at least 3 days. The nurse took photos of everything for the medical record, while Lydia stood in the corner taking her own pictures and writing notes on her tablet about what the doctor was saying. When I got back to the restaurant at noon, there was a thick envelope waiting on my desk from some law firm I'd never heard of, and inside was a letter claiming I had defamed the older woman and damaged her reputation. They demanded a public apology within 48 hours, or they'd pursue legal action for slander, emotional distress, and damage to her social standing in the community. I actually laughed reading it, sitting there with my bandaged wrist and burned hands, looking at their threats about how I'd hurt her feelings by defending myself. The manager came in and told me 3 parties had already canceled their reservations for tonight, saying they'd seen the videos and didn't feel safe eating at a place where such incidents happened. I could hear the servers in the break room talking in low voices, asking each other if they thought more violent customers might show up, wondering if they should start looking for other jobs. When Gonzalo came up from prep, I finally told him the truth about why I'd taken that table in the first place, that I'd wanted to see what our biggest fans were really like when they didn't know who I was. He stared at me for a long moment, then pointed out that my little experiment had put every server at risk, that they didn't have the luxury of revealing themselves as the owner when customers got abusive. The guilt hit me hard because he was absolutely right, and I realized I'd been thinking like a chef curious about his diners instead of a boss responsible for protecting his staff. We decided to call an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning before service to talk about new rules for dealing with abusive customers, and the manager started writing up a policy about when servers could refuse service and call security without needing permission. She kept adding more and more scenarios to the list, remembering other incidents over the years that we'd just brushed off as part of the business, times when we should have stood up for our people but didn't. That evening, while I was going through emails, I found one from a server who'd worked here 2 years ago, saying she'd seen the videos and wanted me to know about her own experience. She described how a customer had thrown a glass at her when she'd forgotten to bring bread, cutting her cheek, but the manager at the time had told her to let it go because the customer was a regular who spent thousands every month. Reading her email made me realize this problem went back way further than just tonight, that we'd been letting rich customers treat our staff like garbage for years because we were afraid of losing their business. The next morning, Lydia showed up at the restaurant with her laptop and a stack of legal pads, setting up in my office like she was preparing for war. She read through my first draft of a statement I'd written at 4 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, shaking her head and crossing out entire paragraphs with her red pen. I'd written 3 pages about how these people had attacked me, but she kept saying we needed to focus on the bigger issue of protecting all restaurant workers, not just what happened to me personally. She deleted the part where I called them entitled parasites and the section where I described each assault in detail, replacing it with general language about zero tolerance for customer abuse. We went back and forth for 2 hours, with her cutting my angry sentences and me trying to sneak them back in, until we had something that sounded professional, but still made the point clear. The manager posted it on our website and all our social media accounts around noon, and within minutes the notifications started flooding in. Some people shared it with supportive comments about how service workers deserve respect, while others said we were being too sensitive, and that wealthy customers who spent thousands deserved special treatment if they wanted it. A few restaurant owners messaged privately to say they supported us, but couldn't say so publicly because they were afraid of losing their own high-spending customers. By 3 o'clock, the Diamond Woman's publicist had released their own statement to several news outlets, claiming I had been aggressive and threatening toward their table. They included photos of the water stains on the tablecloth, as if that was some kind of crime, and a picture of my torn shirt that somehow made it look like I'd done it to myself. Their statement said I had refused to provide proper service, and then intimidated them when they complained, completely reversing who had been the victim. Lydia called me immediately and said not to respond, that we needed to stick to our plan of filing a proper police report with all the evidence we had. She picked me up an hour later, and we drove to the police station together, bringing printed screenshots of the security footage, my medical records from urgent care, and a USB drive with the full videos. The detective at the desk looked bored at first, barely glancing up from his computer when we explained why we were there. But when Lydia played the video of them pouring hot wax on my hands, he sat up straight and called another officer over to watch. They rewound it 3 times, zooming in on the older man's face as he grabbed the candle and poured it deliberately onto my skin. The detective started taking notes quickly, asking for the names of all 4 people and whether we had contact information for them. He said he'd need to interview the staff who witnessed it, and the manager started coordinating schedules when he called the restaurant. She created a spreadsheet with everyone's availability and started pulling timestamps from our security system for every moment of the incident. That evening during service, I tried to lift a heavy stockpot full of sauce, and my wrist shot pain up my entire arm. Gonzalo saw me wince and immediately took the pot from me, telling me to step back and just call out orders. I stood at the pass checking plates and directing the line cooks, but I couldn't do any of the physical work I'd done every night for decades. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from frustration at not being able to work properly in my own kitchen. When one of our regular customers asked to speak with me personally about what had happened, I wrote him a note on the restaurant letterhead instead of going out to his table. I explained that I was taking some time to focus on the kitchen and thanked him for his support, realizing this was probably something I should have started doing years ago. The manager and Gonzalo sat down with me after service to discuss the menu for the next week. Gonzalo suggested we temporarily remove some of the more complex dishes that required precise knife work and heavy lifting, replacing them with equally excellent but less physically demanding options. He'd already worked out substitutions that would maintain our standards while giving me time to heal, and I found myself trusting his judgment completely, without second-guessing every detail. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m., with reporters wanting interviews about violence against service workers. They all wanted exclusive sit-downs or live TV appearances, but Lydia recommended I do just one written Q&A with a food industry publication that had a good reputation. She helped me draft answers that stayed focused on worker safety, without getting into specifics about the people who'd attacked me. We sent it off by noon, and they published it online within 2 hours, getting thousands of shares from other restaurant workers who'd faced similar abuse. Meanwhile, the manager was going through our reservation system when she discovered something that made her slam her laptop shut in anger. The same group had tried to make a new reservation for next week under a different name, using a different credit card but the same phone number. She immediately added all 4 names and their variations to our permanent ban list and started calling other high-end restaurants in the city to warn them. Most of the other managers thanked her and added the names to their own ban lists, creating an informal network of places where these people wouldn't be welcome anymore. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting for 10 o'clock, an hour before we'd start lunch prep, and watched my entire team file into the dining room with worried faces. I'd spent the night working with the manager to create a whole new set of protocols, including installing panic buttons under every server station that would alert security and management instantly if someone felt threatened. We printed signs for the host stand, stating we had zero tolerance for verbal or physical abuse of staff, and anyone violating this policy would be removed and banned permanently. The relief on everyone's faces was obvious as I explained the new system, and then our youngest server raised her hand and told us about a customer last month who'd grabbed her wrist so hard it left bruises when she tried to clear his plate before he was done. Another waiter talked about getting screamed at for 20 minutes because the kitchen ran out of a special, and a busser mentioned customers who'd thrown silverware at him when he accidentally bumped their chair. I realized I'd been blind to what my staff dealt with daily while I stayed safe in the kitchen, protected by my reputation and position. That night during service, the reactions to our new signs were mixed but telling. A couple who'd been regulars for 5 years thanked me personally for taking a stand, leaving a $1,000 tip with a note saying they respected businesses that protected their workers. Another regular pulled me aside to say he'd noticed servers seemed more relaxed and confident already, and he hoped more restaurants would follow our example. But not everyone was happy about the changes. A businessman who spent thousands here monthly complained the signs made him feel like a criminal before he'd even sat down, and a society woman said the panic buttons were ridiculous overreactions that would ruin the elegant atmosphere. The staff held firm, though, with the manager backing them up whenever someone pushed boundaries, and by the end of the night, we'd only had to warn 2 tables about their behavior. 3 days later, I was plating the lunch special when my phone rang with the detective's number. He told me the prosecutor had reviewed all the evidence and was moving forward with misdemeanor assault charges against the older woman for the letter opener incident, though the others would probably avoid charges since their actions, while awful, didn't quite meet the legal threshold for assault. It wasn't perfect justice, but at least there was some accountability happening, and the older woman would have to appear in court and face consequences for attacking me. The detective said the arraignment would be in 2 weeks, and asked if I wanted to attend, which I said I'd think about. Within hours of the charges being filed, Lydia called to say the older woman's attorney had reached out with a settlement proposal. They wanted to make a substantial donation to a charity of my choice if I'd drop the charges and sign a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding. No admission of guilt, no public acknowledgement of what happened, just money changing hands to make it go away like these people always did when they hurt someone they considered beneath them. I told Lydia I needed to think about it and talk to my staff first. That afternoon, I gathered everyone again and explained the settlement offer, asking what they thought we should do. The response was immediate and unanimous, with server after server saying they were tired of rich customers thinking money could erase abuse. Our sommelier said what they really wanted was a public apology to all restaurant workers, not just to me, because this wasn't just about one incident, but about a pattern of treating service staff like they weren't human. The youngest server suggested we demand they acknowledge what they did publicly, so other workers would know they weren't alone in facing this treatment. Everyone agreed that taking money to stay quiet would send the wrong message to every other customer who thought wealth gave them the right to abuse workers. Lydia drafted our counter-proposal that afternoon, demanding a public apology published in major newspapers, a $100,000 donation to a hospitality worker safety fund we'd establish, and lifetime bans from our restaurant with their names and photos posted publicly. We refused to sign any non-disclosure agreement because transparency mattered more than money, and we wanted other restaurants to know exactly who these people were and what they'd done. The response came back within 2 hours, rejecting every single demand, and instead filing a civil lawsuit against me and the restaurant for emotional distress, defamation, and damage to their reputations from the videos circulating online. Their lawsuit claimed I'd deliberately humiliated them by not revealing my identity, that I'd set them up to fail, and that the public exposure had caused them severe psychological trauma requiring therapy. Our insurance company immediately assigned us a defense attorney who reviewed everything and warned this could drag on for months or even years if they had the money to keep fighting, which they obviously did. The insurance company also informed me that our premiums would definitely increase because of the claim, probably by 30% or more starting next quarter. I spent the afternoon going through our budget with the manager, realizing we'd have to postpone the kitchen renovation we'd planned for next year and probably cut back on some of our special events. The new security measures were already costing us, and now the insurance increase would squeeze us even more. But standing up for what was right had financial costs I was willing to pay. Word spread quickly in the industry about the lawsuit, and several food bloggers warned me the health department might do a surprise inspection since we were getting so much attention, both positive and negative. I spent the next 2 days going through every inch of the kitchen with Gonzalo, checking temperatures, expiration dates, cleaning schedules, and making sure every surface was spotless, even though we always maintained high standards. When the inspector showed up unannounced during the lunch rush, we were ready, and she found absolutely nothing wrong, even complimenting us on our organization and cleanliness. The inspection report was perfect, which we immediately posted online to counter any rumors about our standards slipping because of the controversy. That weekend, I had dinner with 5 other restaurant owners at a small place downtown where we could talk privately about everything that had happened. They'd all dealt with abusive customers over the years, and we started planning a fundraising event for hospitality workers who faced harassment, with proceeds going to legal aid and counseling services. We decided to hold it in 3 months, giving us time to organize properly and get more restaurants involved, turning this negative experience into something that might actually help other workers who didn't have the resources or platform to fight back against abuse. The prosecutor called me the next morning to say she'd officially filed misdemeanor assault charges against the older woman for the letter opener attack, though the others would avoid charges since their actions didn't quite meet the criminal threshold. I thanked her and hung up, feeling like at least there was some small message being sent that money didn't make you untouchable, even if it wasn't the full justice I'd hoped for. 2 days later, Lydia walked into my office with papers from their legal team, offering a modified settlement that included a $50,000 donation to a hospitality worker fund, and an agreement to never contact us again, but still no apology or admission of wrongdoing. She sat across from me and explained that without a long trial that could drag on for years and cost us hundreds of thousands in legal fees, this was probably the best outcome we could realistically expect. I signed the papers, feeling exhausted from the whole fight, ready to just move forward and focus on the restaurant again. That Friday, we closed early and held a staff appreciation dinner where I stood in front of everyone and apologized for not protecting them better over the years, for letting customers treat them badly because I was too focused on maintaining our reputation. Several servers wiped their eyes as I promised things would be different now, that their safety and dignity mattered more than any customer's money, and when I finished talking, the whole team applauded, and several came up to hug me. The hostess told me she felt safer at work now than she had in 5 years, and the youngest server said knowing we'd stand up for them made all the difference. 2 weeks after the incident, I sat with the manager going through reservation numbers and saw we'd stabilized at about 90% of our previous bookings, which meant we'd need to adjust staffing slightly, but wouldn't have to let anyone go. We cut back on some of the extra prep cooks for quieter nights and reduced the number of servers on Monday and Tuesday shifts, but everyone kept their jobs, which had been my biggest worry through all of this. I called Gonzalo into my office that afternoon and told him I was promoting him to executive chef, while I'd step back to focus more on the creative side and training new cooks. He stared at me for a moment before breaking into a huge grin and shaking my hand so hard it hurt my still healing wrist, saying he'd been ready for this for years and wouldn't let me down. At 62, with hands that ached every morning and a knee that gave out if I stood too long, it was time to admit I couldn't handle the physical demands of running the line every night anymore. We spent the next day drafting a statement, thanking everyone for their support, and announcing Gonzalo's promotion to executive chef, posting it on our website and social media accounts. The response came flooding in within hours with hundreds of comments, saying they respected how we'd handled everything, and congratulating Gonzalo on his well-deserved promotion, though a few people complained we were just trying to distract from the controversy. The first court date for the criminal case arrived 3 weeks later and turned out to be just lawyers talking about discovery schedules and evidence procedures, while the older woman sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I remembered. I sat in the back row of the courtroom watching the proceedings, feeling calmer than I'd expected, knowing that regardless of what happened here, we'd already done the right thing by standing up for ourselves. The judge set another date for 2 months out and dismissed everyone, the whole thing taking less than 20 minutes after all that buildup. 3 weeks after that, I came into the restaurant at 5 in the morning to find Gonzalo already in the kitchen, working on new menu items he'd been developing. He had me taste a duck confit with cherry reduction that was absolutely perfect. Then, a seafood dish with flavors I'd never thought to combine, but somehow worked brilliantly together. My hands had completely healed by then, with just faint scars where the wax had burned deepest, and the restaurant felt peaceful in that early morning light, with just the two of us working side by side. We spent 3 hours going through his ideas, adjusting seasoning here and there, discussing presentation options, and I realized how much I'd missed this pure creative work without the pressure of service. The lunch crew started arriving around 9, and several stopped to watch us work, excited to see what Gonzalo was creating as our new executive chef. Everything wasn't perfectly resolved and probably never would be, but we were stronger than before, with clear policies protecting our staff and a team that knew we'd support them. The lawsuit was still pending and would probably drag on for months. The insurance premiums had gone up just like they'd warned, and we'd lost some customers who thought we'd overreacted to the whole situation. But watching Gonzalo confidently direct the kitchen crew through lunch prep while I worked on training 2 new line cooks, seeing the servers joke around without that edge of worry they used to carry, knowing we'd turned a horrible night into real change that would protect workers going forward, I felt like we'd come through this better than we'd started. All right, that's all from me today, folks. Thanks for letting me poke around and throw some questions out there with you all. It's always fun hanging out like this. Subscribe for more content like this.